Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
And welcome back to The Wilder Ride, Getting Wilder by the Minute, a podcast that celebrates the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. And for season 2, we are diving into Blazing Saddles, one sweet, low, swinging chariot at a time. I'm Alan Sanders, I'm your host.
And I'm Walt Murray, your co-host.
And we are so pleased to be joined today as our guest, the first guest of season 2, Jim O'Kane. Jim, welcome.
I am very honored to be here. Thanks, guys, for having me on. This is one of my favorite movies. And it's been that way since I was a kid. I mean, any movie that's part of the opening sequence of Monday Night Football for years can't be all bad. You know that.
Well,
yeah,
Jim,
very true.
We'll take a step back for a second. You seem to be the grand poobah of the Loyal Order of Water Buffalo of these movies by minutes makers. You sort of own the group. You kind of manage the conversation. So tell us a little bit about how you started doing the movies by minutes.
Well, I started out by being very old. I seem to be I've seen these. I saw Blazing Saddles as a kid. My dad took me to it and was shaking his head the whole time I was watching the movie. But we love Mel Brooks movies, and I saw this when I was just a very young teenager. And the whole movies by minutes thing is fun because it's the kind of thing that you do when you get out of a movie and you're sitting in a car talking about, hey, did you remember that part about this and that? And this one is the ultimate in just sitting in the car after the movie talking about a movie. So I enjoy listening to everybody's different takes on things and the way we all approach our movies a little bit differently. And you guys have been doing a great job so far. And so keep up the good work.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, we are definitely fans of the podcast you've done. I know I'm still working my way through Apollo 13. I know you had a little bit of a hiatus kind of early on, but your guests are fantastic. Tell us, how did you get so many astronauts and people in the astronaut field before we start going into the Old West? That's a part that fascinates me. So what did you do in your past life that allowed you to bring all these folks onto your podcast?
Well, one of the things is having great friends. One of the friends I have as part of doing this was my co-host, Chris Henry. And Chris Henry has the ultimate Rolodex. He is the curator, the manager of the Experimental Aircraft Association's museum up in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and he specializes in aerospace. And over the years, he has accrued a gigantic contact list of astronauts, mission controllers, flight directors, and just people who love airplanes and space so much. And some of those, include people like Gene Kranz and Fred Hayes and Jim Lovell and Frank Borman. And I get to ride his coattails and meet all these famous people that I adored as a kid and still do to this day. So it's the best thing about being in a Movies by Minutes podcast is you have a perfect excuse to call up all your favorite heroes and chat with them.
It's wild to be able to hear the voices of the people that are then, in my head anyway, I then transpose into the actors that played them in the movie. So it's so weird to have the actual people in your podcast, and I'm used to seeing the actors on screen telling the story.
Oh, sure. And I mean, the best part of it is well, it's sad too, because you can't, the best part is the show that we have before the show when you get all the stories you can't tell in front of a microphone. So, I enjoy those, but I've sworn to secrecy. So it's a great little thing to know.
All right. Before we dive into this minute, we try to do this every time we bring on a guest for the very first time. You mentioned that this is a movie you loved. You remember seeing it in the theater. You're a Mel Brooks fan, but what are some of your earliest memories of this movie and how was it received?
I remember the number one controversy of all things. I mean, considering the language and stuff, I'm sure you've talked about this before, but all the language and just the rudeness of the show. The rudest thing was the baked bean scene, and that was just considered horrific. And people were talking. They had news reports about this awful scene. And today, it's silly juvenile humor. But that was the big controversy at the time. I saw this. I loved Mel Brooks. Ever since the days of Get Smart and the producers and things. The producers. When I was a kid, it had just gone from being in the movie theaters to being on the 4:30 movie in New York. You'd see it in afternoons, and just watching this amazing ability to make a movie out of the most horrendous subject possible and turn it into a comedy. That was part of my growing up. I mean, in the 60s, you had these crazy things like Hogan's Heroes, where they made, movies about funny Nazis. And here, this was the next step, making fun of racism and just all the stereotypes of Western movies that we took for granted. And when you look at it and say to yourself, gosh, we really accepted this in a movie. And that's what made it funny, because everybody had that same, the vocabulary of the screen, the vocabulary of cinema is turned on its head to make a point about the kind of just blind stereotypes that nobody ever really looked at and said, hey, that's really not funny. But in this case, it is funny.
Yeah, we talked extensively in our first few minutes about how a satire is designed to do that. It's designed to take you off guard, generally with humor, but there's a really good message there if you're paying attention.
Yeah, and I mean, you'd never get the impression that Mel Brooks is a racist or a sexist, or he plays these things broadly, and you understand when you're watching it, it's like, this is just simply ridiculous. And then you can take a step back and say, well, that whole concept is ridiculous. So I think Mel Brooks really just tore the whole serious nature of all this thing off and threw it back in the faces of people that took it seriously and say, this is just stupid. And I mean, combined with his work and the work that Richard Pryor does in building the screenplay, it's just a marvelous, perfect movie.
Well, I was on a Facebook page earlier today, and there was a Blazing Saddles clip on there, and a couple of the comments were really bizarre. One of the people said, "This is the most racist movie ever made. I love it," and I started to respond. I was like, no, don't get in a war in Southeast Asia, and don't get in a battle on Facebook. But I wanted to say to that person, you've totally missed the point. The point is exactly pointed at you. You're the tip of the spear on this, because you don't get it, that you're being made fun of by this movie.
Yeah, it's just brilliant. And I know, if you listen to the director commentaries and things that are on all the DVDs and stuff, the actors really struggled with some of the dialogue, and they actually had to be helped through it, saying, yeah, it's okay, you can say this because we're making fun of it.
Right. In fact, another note we had from yesterday, that Cleavon Little said, look, if you were saying this for real, like if we were in a bar or in a street somewhere, I'm going to have a completely different reaction, but we're making a movie and you got a job to do.
Yeah. I one of the things I remember, Slim Pickens was at I'm trying to remember the year now. I think it was about 79 or 80. So I used to go to, I did until I graduated, the University of Texas at Austin. And Slim Pickens actually showed up at a screening of Blazing Saddles in either 1979 or 1980. And one of the things that he said was he had a really big trouble with this particular scene that we're coming up on. When he started, getting up to the word that he had to say for the first time in the movie, he was really having a problem saying it. And some of the cast, including Cleavon Little, came up to him and said, it's okay, we're ready for this. We've talked about this. It's okay. We already went through this at the table read. And they kind of talked him through being able to say it offhandedly. And, it's fascinating. I mean, you think about Slim Pickens. Slim Pickens had been in movies for 30, 40 years. And, he had ridden an A-bomb down into the Soviet Union. But just getting to this one word, it was catching in his throat and stuff, because he didn't talk like that. And, he had to do it as part of his acting. And just the idea that he really had a hard time just getting over that with people who were okay with it. It just speaks to where this movie was, of how important it was to make this film, just from beyond a comedy idea.
You're absolutely right. And the thing we even mentioned, that in some respects, outside of maybe the rising star that was Mel Brooks, Slim Pickens was the biggest star on this picture.
That's true. I mean, the other ones were basically TV stars like Harvey Korman or Dom DeLuise. You don't think of them as movie stars, really. And, actually, Dom DeLuise would be on the rise. This was before Cannonball Run and all that. So these people were heading the other direction.
Yeah, and in some ways, outside of maybe Gene Wilder with the, having been in Willy Wonka 3 years earlier, there wasn't, all these people were still kind of fresh. I mean, they're all household names today, thanks to Mel Brooks. But I mean, Slim Pickens had the gravitas coming into this character in this film.
Yeah, and really this kind of comedy, the adult comedy, broad though it may be, you didn't see this kind of comedy on television without, maybe the exception of not even All in the Family was going to the extent that these were going. This is coming from more like the National Lampoon environment. And remember, this is a year before the birth of Saturday Night Live and just that kind of very sarcastic, ironic comedy, pushing back, pushing the envelope a bit on a comedy. And Mel Brooks was leading the way.
Well, he definitely had the eye of a lot of people because they were trusting him, because he honestly didn't even have a real true hit until this came out, and nobody believed it was going to be a hit. I think the story goes, the very first screening in front of, as is typical in most Hollywood cliche stories, all the executives, not a single laugh, and one of the executive producers basically made him take down a list of all the things that he needed to take out of the movie, of which Mel Brooks laughingly said, I then turned around, crumpled it, and filed it in the trash can. So he didn't take any of this stuff out, but the whole time he said, yes, sir, I'll take that out. Yes, sir, I'll take that out. But the executives hated it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, if you think about it from a financial point of view, this could be, you could wind up with protests out in front of the theaters, and who knows what would have happened. I mean, that's the way we're looking at it from just a dollar perspective, but not realizing what a determined moneymaker Mel Brooks movies are. They Blazing Saddles, Silent Movie, Young Frankenstein, all of these things were yet to come.
Right. Well, let's go ahead and dive into this minute then, because we start off where we left yesterday. We start off with a Chinese guy who had collapsed being carried off, and we're going to end with a real song. So a song, I don't know if these guys feel much like singing, but let's go ahead and dive into this right off the bat. We are on a rail line, and one of the things that I love about what Mel Brooks did is when you look at a lot of the Westerns, especially Hollywood, they sort of glossed over a lot of the races that were behind the scenes building the railroad, the Chinese, the Irish, the freed slaves who would go to work for the rail lines. And this line is peppered with all of those immigrants that really were the backbone of the rail line.
Yeah, and we're looking at very far into the rail line. This would I'm assuming based on the year, this is 1874.
It's supposed to be, 100 years prior to the writing of setting it like the story we told the other day, Andrew Bergman, which by the way, we totally forgot this, Walt. Andrew Bergman's birthday was 5 days ago from the release of this episode. So he was the one who came up with the initial story, the treatment called Tex-Ex, that was given to a executive at one studio that gave it to Mel Brooks, who turned around and renamed it Black Bart, and eventually we got Blazing Saddles. But Andrew Bergman's birthday was February 20th, so a belated happy birthday. He's still with us. He's still, actually, Walt, didn't you say he's getting ready to produce another film?
Yeah, he has something unnamed in production.
So, but with that said, it's very much capturing 100 years prior to the rise of sort of the Harlem movement and the black film and the jazz and all the stuff that was really becoming on the backside of civil rights. And Andrew Bergman said, well, I'd love to see what we could do with the rise of this black power, but how fun would it be if we did it 100 years ago? And so it is 1874.
So we're after the Transcontinental Railroad. This would be, I'm thinking this, there was a second Transcontinental Railroad that most people don't know about, the Southern Pacific, which was part of the Central Pacific out in the West. They still use the same Chinese immigrants to build the rails, but further south toward what's now Interstate 10. If you follow through out of LA through Bakersfield and then into like Quartzsite, Arizona and stuff. So this is roughly following what's known as Interstate 10 nowadays. The Death Valley and Coachella, all that stuff would be happening here. But yeah, heavily Chinese influenced on the work, and freed slaves from places like Oklahoma that had moved west to find employment, and it was difficult. So from the east side, you had freemen that were working west, and the Chinese immigrants who were working east on what's now the Southern Pacific line, or now Union Pacific. So it's interesting to see. I apologize because I get very railroad nerdy when I start watching movies about the West.
It's okay. We like
railroad.
Sheldon.
So,
well, and I'm a big history buff, so I'm kind of getting caught up in what you're talking about, and of course, that is a very interesting and misunderstood part of American history, and I think some of this movie it parodies a lot of those old westerns that just totally blew history apart, and it has kind of become what we view as American history, but it's completely inaccurate.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, one of the things that people don't realize are the miles involved. I mean, building these things. It's just enormous distances. I mean, the where that second transcontinental line went, the Southern Pacific, they had kind of a gold spike ceremony out in Deming, New Mexico. It's a little middle of nowhere, New Mexico, east of Lordsburg. Lordsburg is familiar to anybody who's ever seen the movie Stagecoach. That's where they were headed in their stagecoach. But Deming is roughly 1,000 miles from Los Angeles, and all that was laid by hand by these Chinese immigrants, and then from the east, like Las Cruces and El Paso, they had Mexican and freed slaves building westward to meet them at Deming, New Mexico, and it was rough work. I mean, it was really like they say in this movie where it's it's not a bit over 114 degrees, backbreaking work, and it never really. I've never really seen a movie showing that in any westerns that I've seen where it was just brutal, an awful place to be. And the idea of all these guys just, leaning in close harmony on a Cole Porter song, it's just, that's just surreal.
Well, I do love it. I love that just as, they're carrying the guy away here, and you automatically have this sort of device of the rail line sort of being the line in the sand, and all of the rail workers that were ironically in the first opening establishing shots on both sides of the tracks, they're all of a sudden all on one side, and all of the, I guess the foreman and his teamster, his group of, keeping people working, are all on the other side of the tracks.
Yeah, and they all seem to be, have some kind of a relationship to the South, that maybe they did work on plantations or things. They all act with a superior attitude, not very camaraderie with the workers, and Mr. Gilliam it seems to be mostly very derogatory to everybody that's under his care, or lack thereof.
Yeah, he's playing to the audience of his fellow yes men all around him who think he's the funniest guy in the room, and he enjoys it at the expense of all of those who are doing the work. Yeah,
and I love Burt and Gilliam. I loved him in the Burt Reynolds movie Gator, and here he is just as smarmy and dislikable as you'd ever want. I have a feeling he'd be a great guy to get a beer with off the set, but he just comes across as just the most dislikable fella you'd ever want to have in a film, and a great foil for Cleavon Little here, because obviously he wasn't expecting the response that he got.
Nope. In fact, I think he's trying to play superior by saying, come on, boys, where's your spirit? When you were slaves, you sang like birds. And I like when he's saying this, you've got a couple of Chinese guys in there, and they're probably going, what are you talking about? We may have been sold into indentured servitude, but we certainly weren't slaves on plantations.
Yeah. The colleagues of Cleavon Little here, as Bart's looking, they're all getting mad, but Black Bart has a whole different take on this, that he understands how he can take down Mr. Burton's character, or Burton Gilling's character.
Yeah, one or two of the guys starts across the track, and he grabs him and holds him back, and then starts whispering with him. So they were ready to go at him.
Yeah. It's but he manages to diffuse the situation and enrage the situation all at the same time.
I think it's a brilliant bit of not only script writing but also storytelling, in the sense that very quickly we see not only how bright, but how witty this main character is. And we automatically like him within just the first few seconds here, instead of encouraging a fight or instead of taking on some kind of a big, long soliloquy or some kind of a, monologue of why you can't treat us this way or don't you know what we're from. He says, "Oh, okay, you want a song?"
Yeah.
Just completely turns it on its head.
Yeah, it's this almost falls into the kind of the Uncle Remus stories of being able to overturn people that are trying to oppress you, and it has an amazing. I mean, it's part of American culture of finding that a way of letting somebody think that they've gotten their way, but when actually they haven't at all. So he does, we'll give you a song here. Here you go, and the song that they choose from. Completely out of anachronistic song like a Cole Porter song, and imagining how Wild West cowboys would react to that. It pretty much the face that you see on all these overseer fellows. It's like, what are these things? What is that from?
Right. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, this is from the Broadway musical Anything Goes, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's a musical. I mean, that was. You could argue that that Anything Goes was probably the first true all-American musical, the kind of musical that we're used to from Broadway nowadays. It's got a story. It tells the story almost operatically with, it'll stop and tell the story in words and then break into a song, and the song has to do with advancing the plot. So, but that would be in the 1934, 35 or somewhere around there. So it's
yeah. Anything Goes premiered in 1934.
Okay, so yeah, so it's almost 50 years ahead of what they're doing here, 60 years ahead. But that is such an iconic song from Anything. I mean, if they couldn't do Anything Goes, because then they'd have to break into tap dancing, and you can't really do that with the high kicks out in the middle of the sand. But
I almost want to do a shout out to our fellow Indiana Jones Minute friends, because when they did the second movie, Temple of Doom, and it starts off with a musical and the song Anything Goes, and they said that was just setting the tone. From this point forward, anything goes. And I think it's ironic. Here's Mel Brooks well beforehand picking a song from the same musical with almost that exact same attitude. Everything you're going to see from this point forward, it's Anything Goes.
I get no kick from champagne. Mere alcohol doesn't thrill me at all. So tell me, why should it be true that I get a belt out of you? Some get a kick from cocaine.
Hold it! What the hell is that shit?
yeah, it really it's all over the place, and even the song that they're using here is the pre-code version. Before the production code, you weren't allowed to talk about alcohol and especially drugs, and he stops them on the line about some folks get a kick from cocaine. Even Cole Porter dropped it after the production code. The movie production code didn't allow it in movies, and he changed it to perfume from Spain, I think was the line that they dropped in its replacement.
Yeah, I think Cole Porter had a couple of different what he called his approved alternatives, and that was one that you brought up yesterday on Facebook. I was watching that, and you said, "Oh, we'll get into it tomorrow." But yeah, some like the perfume from Spain, and another one was including a whiff of Guerlain.
Okay, Guerlain is also it's a French perfume, so it would be about the same thing. So it's like some people really like the smell of perfume, so it's bowdlerized, but it does make it a little bit nicer for air safe.
But does it work when you have the safe version? Because it doesn't feel right. Your first line is about about champagne, and then all of a sudden it's like, but some people get a kick out of perfume from Spain.
Yeah, it's what you have to do. I mean, it's like keeping 1 foot on, what is it, 1 foot on the floor. If a man and woman that are not married are sitting on a bed, you have to keep 1 foot on the floor. So all these crazy kinds of Hollywood production code that came out the same. I think it was about the same year that the song came out. So that whole idea of just being nice for niceness sake, that's where they had to do it. Although, cocaine is the perfect, it's the perfect thing to say, this is what people get a belt out of or a kick out of and things. So, but it rhymes at least,
But what? One of the radio stations that I work at, that for a while they had us during off hours, they would play some adult standards, and there was always this Frank Sinatra version, and they always had the line, the cocaine line. I never heard the alternative line, so it's kind of wild. I guess at this point we feel like, oh, it's kind of edgy for an adult standard program to have the Frank Sinatra version singing that lyric, just like they do here in the movie.
Well, yeah, but I think still, I think that Anything Goes is still like the number one play that's done in high schools and middle school musicals. So I don't think they use the cocaine line in those middle school productions.
I would hope not.
Well, have you seen some of the schools?
Yeah, true enough.
But it was from the time, and here it could be just Mel Brooks trying to point out, underline the fact that, hey, we're not under the production code anymore. This is an R-rated movie, and here we can do what we want. So dropping the cocaine line back into the film. It's think about the same time. With 4 years after this, if you, a favorite of radio personalities everywhere, WKRP. One of the characters, Dr. Johnny Fever, his story in the show that he got thrown off of a previous radio station for saying booger on the air. So that was the time that this is in. You can get thrown off for different things, and that was, at the time, booger was a bad thing to say on the air. Now, you can say that on Radio Disney.
Right.
So it's, times change.
Well, and even the fact that when they aired this on TV, they left in all the racial insults, but covered over the farting noises with horses winning. It just shows you how kind of ridiculous and misaimed those codes were.
Yeah, well, I wish I could remember who to cite this from, but somebody said the level of taboos stay the same. It's just the taboos change. We always have the same. We are as Victorian as the Victorians were. We're just Victorian about different topics. There's things you can't say on the air now that you used to be able to, and there's things that you can say on the air that would have gotten you fired, 30, 40 years ago. So but the level of what's taboo has never really changed. We all have our own shibboleths, and that's where we're at.
Well, I think that's one of the things that makes this movie interesting to look at in 2019, because this is a snapshot of where culture was in the early 70s. And this did, rustle some feathers, but it does speak to what was going on culturally and in our society in the United States in that time period.
Yeah, oh, that's true. And there are, there were movies whose, the particular word from this minute, were used in the title of the movie. There's posters of them. I can't imagine them even showing the movies simply because they couldn't put the name of the movie in, your TV guides and things like that. So it's just, the world has changed, mostly for the good, but it's interesting that we have, this movie, which was written to overcome, racist slurs and things like that, is now sometimes used as to point out, gee, thank God we're past this, where this was kind of allowed in our entertainment, and it's taking away the wrong message from what this movie, what the message of this movie was.
Oh yeah, but it's like you said, energy is never created or destroyed; it's just changed, right? So now we've got a whole different level of short-sightedness. Now we can't even tell a joke for a point because if it uses a word that bothers us, we don't even bother listening to the meaning. We just hear a series of consonants that just sound offensive to us, or we're told we're not supposed to ever say, and then we completely miss the meaning of the movie because we're willing to dismiss it for a word.
Yeah, I can't imagine Mel Brooks being able to make this movie nowadays. I don't think that would ever happen. It's just simply would be too controversial, and it was made at the right time for the right reasons, and the only reason we still have it was because that there's people that still understand the reasons behind the making of this movie. I noticed one other a change in Mel Brooks's content is if you go see the producers and you're seeing the play Springtime for Hitler, the actors wearing the German SS uniforms don't have swastikas on their sleeves because it's considered offensive. So they just have white circles on their sleeves, and it's just like, well, that kind of defeats the whole purpose of what they're making fun of.
Right.
But some people gathered offense from that, so they took it out, which kind of it's kind of underlining the point instead of proving the point.
Speaking of the line that we're talking about with the cocaine line, I've got the script, the last one before they went shooting, which was their the final script blessed on February 6, 1973, and got one last revision on February 27, 1973. Initially, they were just going to stop with the line, "That's why I get a kick out of you." But I don't know what happened on the set. I don't know if they just kept going and the guys just kept riffing. But when Cleavon Little does the get a kick from cocaine, but he's like, "Cocaine," and he's like waving back and forth. My brother and I still to this day, we just start giggling because that is just funny as anything, just visually, audibly, as well as the fact that he's just sticking it in the face of the foreman.
See, when I watch the movie, I do the background, the
I was doing that all day today in the kitchen, waiting for this minute, and I think I drove my wife out of the house.
It's a great song in any case. No matter what the context, I love the sound of the song.
Well, and it is funny that in the context of this movie, a song that was originally sung by Ethel Merman is what they use here. It really does stand kind of in a very stark contrast to the rest of the movie.
Wow, yeah, good old Reno.
And the fact that you brought up the fact that it's anachronistic. When I was younger, I had no idea that when one song was written or another, you just knew this song didn't fit, and because of it, that's what made it even funnier.
Yeah, and it's funny, they use this anachronistic song, and as you're going to see in about I guess 10 minutes or so, when Count Basie showing up playing April in Paris, it's even more anachronistic. But it's like just all the surrealism out in the desert. It's beautiful, and it really it works right down to the very last scene of just the crazy anachronisms of being in a Western in the 1970s.
It's almost like the filmmakers or the writers and Mel Brooks and company are constantly reminding the audience of 1974. Hey, we may have set this 100 years ago, but we've got these reminders nonstop that we're talking to you today, 1974.
Yeah, it's very wacky, and the general audience didn't know National Lampoon style humor, but they did understand good Borscht Belt humor from Mel Brooks, and this is just as wacky as what he had done in Get Smart. So it's that same level of just rapid fire craziness, where you're still trying to figure out what happened 10 seconds before, and something new comes up. You're like, wait, what is this going on? And so it's you spend most of your time just trying to find your balance and continue to get knocked off balance by these anachronisms and just rapid fire comedy.
Well, I like the way that they frame Burton Gilliam here. They frame Lyle's face, and Lyle has this scrunched up face as they're singing, and then he says, hold it. What the hell is that shit? Yeah. I'm in a song, a real song. And he pulls the audience in with him. And so the audience is kind of feeling like, yeah, what is that? We're with Lyle on this one. And so I think that the way they wrote that and produced it did a great job of pulling all of us along with the way that Lyle felt, and that we could, for once, relate to him. We can't relate to him very often, but I think he's as confused as we are when they're singing that song.
Yeah, but I would add that it goes back to what we said at the beginning of the minute here, where I said, if you look, all of a sudden, magically, all of the railroad workers are on one side of the track, all of the guys driving the railroad workers, all the white guys are on the other side of the track, and you've got sort of this mirror opposite thing happening where Lyle is sort of in charge of his group, Bart's in charge of his group, and they're almost having like a verbal duel, but with song. Yeah,
it is like like dueling banjos, except it's just dueling cowboys out. The other thing as it develops, where Lyle's trying to explain the kind of song that he wants, they just as the guys building the railroad were doing this close harmony of a Cole Porter song, you don't expect these rough looking hombres that are standing behind Lyle to suddenly start doing a buck and wing about Stephen Foster's song. It just that character break there, it's very confusing, and you're like, wait, they don't do that in cowboy movies, do they? So
well, and that's actually almost a perfect bridge to get us into tomorrow, because we stop right here where Lyle is saying, I mean a song, a real song. And we don't know what he means by that, other than maybe he's going to give us a demonstration.
We can only hope.
We can only assume.
Yes.
We've never seen this past this minute, right? Like, isn't that the premise of movies 1 minute at a time?
Well, yes. You just wonder what's going to happen next.
So before we then get into Friday, into tomorrow, Jim, was there anything else about this minute that you had in your notes that we might have glossed over and we need to go back and catch up on?
No, it's beautiful. I mean, one of the things that is kind of overlooked is how the comedy of this movie is in the vocabulary of the cinematography. And if you've ever watched a John Ford film or any Western, just the panoramic view in the background there of what I'm assuming is the Arizona hills. It's just this enormous vista that is so much the language of the Western. This wouldn't have worked if they had tried to, take a 1974 view of how cowboy films were. Like if you're thinking of shooting it from above and looking down, or shooting like a Sam Peckinpah style of film. This is very John Ford, and that's what makes the comedy. I mean, the comedy is that they play it straight so that the hijinks stand out, and that's the only thing else I had on my notes for this one.
I can't get into the detail, but I know we've got a couple of guests coming up that are Old West aficionados. I've got a guy coming up who is an actual cowboy trick gun artist. He is a cowboy performer. He collects clothing and memorabilia from the 1870s on. And I've got another guy who is a black cowboy reenactor, and we're going to have them both on. Both of them have told me off air as we were getting ready for this that these costumes are not anywhere close to what you would have been wearing in the Old West at that time. This was sort of Hollywood's way of saying, well, let's dress them like cowboys.
Yeah. I don't think the Old West would have worked this way if you had to spend a lot of time out in the hot sun wearing what they're wearing.
But you know what? I never even thought about it because the lay person doesn't know the history. So we'll have some fun when those guys come on later in the podcast in this season. But I do know these guys are good enough to say, well, one guy's holding a Winchester rifle that wasn't manufactured until 1891, so it wouldn't have existed at this time. And I'm like, how do you know that? It's amazing, these guys. So, Walt, do you have anything that we glossed over that we need to cover?
There was one thing right in the very first couple of seconds of this minute when they pick up the Chinese guy who has collapsed. They only carry him like 2 feet and then just drop him right there. And so
you're right.
I was wondering where they were taking him, but they just take him and drop him. So I don't know what kind of medical coverage that is, but I guess they were like, well, he's dead. So they just throw him out of the way of the upcoming song and dance.
That's amazing. You're absolutely right. They carry him maybe 4 feet. They just put him right back down on the ground.
Yeah, and one of the Chinese guys standing there does walk around, and it looks like he's kind of tending to him. But I thought that was funny that they just kind of threw him out of the way, and that was it with him.
Oh, one other thing to point out, obviously the black actors, the black railroad workers do take center stage. They're closest to the camera. But if you look at a lot of the shots, it's the entire railroad crew where I'm pointing out you've got some of the guys wearing the Chinese hats, but you can see some of the Irish guys all in the back. So this is a multiracial work crew.
Yes, but only the black guys are singing.
Yeah, but everybody else is grinning.
Oh, yeah, they're loving it.
They are so enjoying being on that side of the tracks.
Well, it's great to, no matter what the circumstance, a lot of times, it's great to stick it to the boss. So I'm sure that's what those guys are in for, too.
All right. Well, that's all I've got. Walt, anything else you have?
Nope, that's it for me.
All right. Well, before we tease what's coming up tomorrow, Jim, you got to join us for the first time today. We've got you for a couple of days. Where can people learn a little bit more about the Jim O'Kane Show?
Well, you can find all of my shows. Let me just talk about my current one, Apollo 13 Minute, where we go over like you're doing 1 minute at a time. We go over the 1995 Ron Howard directed feature Apollo 13. You can find that at apollo13minute.com. It's also available on iTunes and Google Play or wherever fine podcasts are delivered. If you want to find my other movies by minutes movies, just go to jimokane.com. Leave out the apostrophe, JIMOKANE.com. You can find all of my movies by minutes and other projects that I work on.
Excellent. And some really, really good stuff. And the guests you get, I know maybe you'll mention the Rocketeer tomorrow, but just to get the actor on with so many minutes with you had to have been a mind-blowing experience for you.
Oh, it was unreal. We'll talk about a little bit more about that tomorrow. I'll say that for tomorrow.
Okay, we'll save it for Friday, right?
Yes.
All right. Walt, where can people learn a little bit more about us and if they skipped out on season 1?
The best place to learn about us is going to be on Facebook, facebook.com/The Wilder Ride. And then you'll want to click the button and join our listeners group. From there, you find out everything you ever needed to know about us and everything going on in our group. There's a lot of discussion going on. As we go through this movie, there's going to be more and more Blazing Saddles talk. Also, you can go to thewilderride.com and check out our past episodes, our bios, and also you can look at the guest list and find out where to learn more about our guests.
And definitely come back tomorrow. We're going to close out this first week with minute number 5. Jim O'Kane will be joining us back. And we're going to start off with Lyle continuing. His last words today were a real song. He'll continue with something like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And we're going to end with What in the Wide, Wide World of Sports? And what does that have to do with a Western? All of that coming back tomorrow on The Wilder Ride.
Swing Low, Sweet Chariot.
I used to have a low rider. My brother loved that. We go low riding all the time. We were swinging low.
That was one of my least favorite songs ever. Low Rider.
Low rider.
Take a little trip. Anyway.